Never miss our updates and be part of our conversation squad.
Good evening, Manthanites. Welcome to another session. Today's session, of course, is on a Saturday evening, departure from our usual Sunday morning. And that is because our speaker for tonight lives in the United States, and our morning session would be very inconvenient for him. So welcome to our 6 o'clock Saturday with Dr. Sam Pitroda, inventor, entrepreneur who has spent more than 55 years in telecom and a lot of development there. He's credited with having laid the foundation of India's technology and telecommunication revolution in the 1980s during Rajiv Gandhi's government. Dr. Pitroda has been a leading campaigner to bridge the global digital divide. In fact, I think our Indian telecom revolution started at that time when we started all the C-Dot and those new exchanges that came up, and access to telecom became much easier for the common Indian. In the mid-90s, he founded WorldTel in London to help privatize telecom in developing countries. He invented the electronic diary in 1974, the mobile wallet in 96, and set up CSAM, acquired by MasterCard in 2013. From 2005 to 2014, Dr. Pitroda was chairman of the National Knowledge Commission and advisor to the Indian Prime Minister with the cabinet minister's rank. He was also chairman of the National Innovation Council, Smart Grid Task Force, and Railway Modernization and the Public Broadcast Reforms. He's the founder, inventor, and chairman of 6 startups and 5 non-profit foundations. Dr. Pitroda holds over, and I was surprised when I read it 3 times to whether it was right or wrong, holds over 100 patents and 20 honorary PhDs, and has published and lectured extensively globally. He's a member of the American Academy of Engineers, and his biography was published in '92, and Penguin published his autobiography, Dreaming Big, in 2015. Over to you, Dr. Pitroda.
Thank you, Chalaji. Greetings from Chicago to all Manthan friends. Sharwan, thank you for being with us. It is indeed a special honor and privilege for me to be with all the Manthan members to talk a little bit about my recent book entitled Redesign the World, a call to global action. I know all of us have gone through a very complicated last couple of years. Like many of us, I was locked up at home for almost 18 months. And during that time, I decided to write a book, which had been on my mind for quite some time, but haven't had the time to take a pen or a keyboard and start writing. Finally, I felt the best way of using this silence and keep my sanity is to finish this book. The book idea had been with me for over 7-8 years. I wrote my autobiography, published by Penguin, called Dreaming Big. I realized that world was last designed just about the time I was born. I was born in 1942 in British Raj, in a small little tribal village in Orissa, India, a place called Titilagad. I was part of a large family, Gujarati parents, moved to Orissa looking for work in 30s. My father had 4th grade education. And when India became independent, my father's aspiration, like aspirations of the millions of Indians, changed. He realized that now he was free to do whatever he wanted to do in India. And he decided that his real mission is to make sure that all his children go to college, study English, and get empowered with education. Since there were no good schools in a small little village in Orissa, my parents decided to send me to a school in Gujarat. And that's where I got my grounding in Gandhian values. Growing up in the house, Gandhi was the role model because he was the only connection with Gujarat that my parents had in early 40s and late 30s. In our house, there were big pictures hanging of Gandhi, Nehru, Patel, Maulana Azad, and Subhash Chandra Bose. And we grew up looking at those pictures on the wall. In the boarding school, we learned Gandhian discipline, truth, trust, love, democracy, freedom, justice, equality, secularism. All of these values became part of life. Then I went to college in Baroda. One fine day during getting my master's in physics, I read in the newspaper that President Kennedy has decided to send man onto the moon. And it felt romantic. And I decided to come to America. But I didn't have money. I used to earn out of teaching students physics and math. So I borrowed a little bit of money. And from Mumbai to Karachi, Karachi to Aden, to Egypt, Egypt to Genoa, and Naples to Genova. Took a train from Genova to London, took a plane from London to New York, and took a bus from New York to Chicago. This was 7 years ago. Set up my life here, studied electrical engineering as opposed to physics, had a girlfriend in India, called her here in 66 and got married and started my life. Fortunately, I got to work in 1965-66 as one of the pioneers in digital communication. It was just my luck. And when I look at my journey in telecom, I realize that transistor was born after I was born. I've used 4-bit microprocessor, 8-bit microprocessor, program in machine language. And the telecom IT revolution has been at the core of fundamental changes in my life. And I started focusing on hyperconnectivity. Today, for the first time in the world, first time in the human history, we are all connected. What does it mean to have this connectivity? Hyperconnectivity is all about democratization of information, decentralization of implementation, and demonetization of services like education, health, transport, ultimately energy. It is also about content, context, and content. It essentially empowers individual to decide the destiny of their own life in their hand. It makes human being capable of exploring new frontiers. Then I realized that the world was last designed just about the time I was born in 1942, predominantly by the US. This design gave birth to UN, World Bank, IMF, NATO, WTO, WHO, and lots of measurements like GDP, GNP, per capita income, balance of payment, trade deficit. Then in 1942, that era, India was still a British colony. So India's input didn't matter. China was very poor, communist. No one paid attention to China. And Africa didn't matter. So a handful of Western countries decided that we must redesign the world because the world was in ruin, had to be put back on track. Japan had to be rebuilt. Europe had to be rebuilt. So the design basically focused on 5 key issues, or what I call 5 key pillars: democracy, human rights, capitalism, consumption, and military. Consumption was very important because they had to rebuild all economies. So people had to buy to create jobs. Everyone agreed to this design because there were no other alternatives. Then world was bipolar. You had US and you had Soviet Union. Soviet Union was exactly opposite to US. In terms of democracy, their answer was party-led dictatorship. Human rights, their answer was, if you don't follow party, you will have serious issues with the government. Capitalism, it was state-controlled economy. Consumption was controlled. The only common element was military. Both sides were building huge military power. After this design, it was decided that UN would be in New York. World Bank leader would be always from America. IMF leader would be always from Europe. And this group of people will dictate how world operates. Rule-based system was a great contribution of the US to the world, in a sense. Today, we all follow these rules and a rule-based system. We judge countries based on GDP, GNP, per capita income. People write about human rights violations. Democracies are preferred everywhere, but though at an operating level, life is very different. So this rule-based system has really done well for the last 75 years. It has maintained peace, improved longevity, decreased infant mortality, democratized technology, and lots of good things have happened. But at the same time, we have created major environmental blunders. We have not reduced global poverty substantially, still there. Hunger is still hounding us. Violence still remains with us. And this is the concern. That design did well, but it did extremely well for very few people, where very few people have become very rich and large number of people remain in abject poverty. So this inequality has really created a lot of stress in the system. Just after the design was set in place, Mahatma Gandhi-led independence movement in India began the process of decolonization. And the entire world got decolonized in a very short span of 25 years. No one had ever thought that world would get decolonized that quickly. Design really didn't take into consideration decolonization of the world. Design then assumed that there'll be a handful of independent countries predominantly led by Western world. Then came rise of China. No one ever thought that China would be able to rise the way China has been able to rise in a short span of 30, 40 years. Simultaneously, fall of Soviet Union. Soviet Union disintegrated in moments, and lots of new countries were born with democratic aspirations. Aspirations to copy America, freedom, justice, were in the forefronts in the minds of the new nations. At the same time, democracy gave rise to spread of technology. I give this example all the time that before coming to America, I had never used telephone. I was too poor to have telephone in India then. And if somebody had a telephone in India, he was too rich to be my friend. Then technology was not accessible to large number of people. I had also not seen any television. I knew how to design one, but I had never seen one before coming to America. So today, technology has been democratized. Everyone has access to phone. Everyone has access to television. Everyone understands how things work. Aeroplanes have become a common mode of transport. Technology is now pervasive. But this has also created inequality. Like I said earlier, very few have become very rich, and lots of people have remained poor. The benefits of technology has not really reached poorest of the poor in rural areas. At the same time, all of a sudden, there was 9/11, which was a response to a unipolar world. And that changed America completely. And finally, COVID-19. No one ever thought that one little virus in middle of nowhere will put entire world on halt. Time out. Everybody stayed home. Economies were on hold, and life changed completely. Millions died, and that process is still going on. Though we have vaccine, we really don't know the long-term impact of COVID. COVID may be around for next 3-4 more years to come, who knows? But the fact that COVID tells us that we are all interconnected, interwoven, interdependent. What does it mean to live in a world where one little virus can affect all of us? What does it mean to nationality? What does it mean to borders? So during that period, I realized, like many, that there are only two things in life that matter. One, planet. Need planet. Planet doesn't need us. And the last design has really created havoc in terms of environmental blunders to our planet. Global warming is a major concern. I believe the very existence of humanity is at stake right now. We have spent last 25, 30 years discussing global warming, carbon emission, carbon capture, alternate energy. While discussing all these, we realized that we have created a mountain of garbage in ocean as big as Alaska. And this is the byproduct of the design that we created after World War. We know what is going on at the conference. We have been discussing this for many years, and now at Glasgow. And what we have done at Glasgow is said that we will have zero emission by 2050. China will commit to zero emission by 2060, and India has committed to zero emission by 2070. That is too far out. The consequences of this is that in 20 years, we would have basically destroyed our planet. A lot of young people are shouting, fighting, but leaders there go with their national agenda and not with global agenda. So one, COVID-19 says we got to pay attention to planet more than we have paid in the past. It is a burning issue. It is a big challenge. And two, at the end of the day, people matter. We haven't taken care of our people in a manner we should have. We divide people. We discriminate based on race, religion, caste, color, geographical location, not knowing that these things don't matter at all. COVID-19 did distinguish based on caste, color, or religion, or even borders. So when I thought about all this, I realized that it is time to rethink our model. But what does it mean to redesign a world? What do you start? Where do you start? So when I look at all the global conversations going on today, whether it is at G7, G8, G9, 20, or whatever, I realize that our conversation today is all about economy, trade, finance, military equipment, technology, and not about planet or people. All of the global leaders think only in terms of what is good for first them, then for their constituency, for their party, and then for their country. No one is focusing on what is good for planet and what is good for people. It is unfortunate. You read all of the conversations about global leaders meeting, and basically they go into each other to visit more as a marketing representative of their country. You don't have today the kind of leader world needs to solve world's problem. You need Gandhi, Mandela, Martin Luther King kind of leadership, which is willing to sacrifice, willing to look at larger issues beyond self to really save this planet and uplift the people of the world. I believe hyperconnectivity has a key role to play in the redesign because hyperconnectivity is changing everything. It is changing our education, our health, governance, trade, finance, distribution, delivery, retail, commerce. There is nothing that is not affected by hyperconnectivity today. Do we use hyperconnectivity just to improve productivity, efficiency, reduce cost? Or we use hyperconnectivity to take humanity to the next level? Is the question I asked. How do we take humanity to the next level using hyperconnectivity? What is the core of hyperconnectivity? And how do we have to think differently to benefit from hyperconnectivity, to really change the mindset of the leaders and people to look at larger challenges facing our planet and our people? So when I look at the last design, I realized that a lot of good things have happened. We must build on it. And the redesign has to be evolutionary and not revolutionary. So let's take the real challenge in front of us to really understand the proposed new design. So I believe our first task world over is to take democracy to inclusion. None of the democracies are inclusive. In America, we have Black Lives Matter. In India, we have Harijans, Dalits, minorities, and we discriminate people. Even in 2021, we label people as black and white, red, brown, yellow. We put labels on religion, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jews, Buddhist, whatever. We put label on their nationality. We even distinguish in terms of genders. Women don't get the kind of respect and rights they deserve. So we have created this mindset which basically begins to divide people at all levels. So first redesign challenge is to build real stronger democracy. Today, democracies are being threatened by populist movement. You know what happened in the US. To some extent, you know what is going on in many other countries, including India. Authoritarian mindset has taken over institutions, which include judiciary, police, income tax, security and safety, science and technology, education. These people have also curbed the role of civil society. Civil society is not at the table to discuss major national issues. Only business and government decide what is good for people. And finally, in the process, scientific mindset has been corrupted. Logical thinking is not encouraged. People are divided. False narratives are promoted. From my perspective, truth is not followed and lies are propagated and amplified. Trust is not respected. Mistrust is the way of life. Love is converted to hate. How do you look at humanity's well-being if you think like this? So first task is to really strengthen democracies with new technology and new tools, including with hyperconnectivity, because democracy is not about voting once every 5 years. Democracy is not about putting a strong leader in place who operates based on control and dictatorial mindset. Democracy is all about people's participation, decentralization, listening to people, having broader conversation, and allowing people to express their opinion and respect their opinion. Second thing is human rights are not good enough. We need human needs. We need to make sure that needs of the people, like food, water, shelter, clothing, are the key priority for the world. You cannot have a system where you spend $2 trillion a year on defense hardware, and you are not willing to spend $200 billion a year to eliminate hunger in this world. For 50 years, we have been talking about eliminating hunger. There are seminars at World Bank and United Nations and everybody. Nothing much has happened. It's like climate control. Great conferences, very little action. So we need to really realize that we live in a world of surplus and not scarcity. We can produce anything. We need to decide what is that we want to produce and for whom do we want to produce. Do we want to produce for people who can afford to buy, or we want to produce for people who need it? A very different kind of mindset. Third, capitalism hasn't worked for everybody. How do we design new economy that work from bottom up, encourage small enterprises, network to scale, emphasize local production, local capabilities, local soil, local microbes, local talent. And there is nothing that says globalization is against localization and localization is against globalization. In the mad rush to globalize everything, we have moved all of the manufacturing to one country called China. No one has anything to produce anymore. In the process, we have created huge vacuum everywhere because all businesses try to optimize profits by finding a place where they can manufacture things 5%, 10% cheaper. And in the process, they ignore local jobs, local communities, and they have nothing to buy because they don't have jobs. So rather than optimizing human potential, human capabilities, local consideration, we decided to optimize profits. And in the process, the entire world moved all manufacturing to China. How do we bring it back and do some balancing? It's a challenge. So we need to design new economy which doesn't just focus on GDP and GNP, but also worries about gross environmental product, gross human development product. These are big challenges. Then consumption. Can we focus on conservation and sustainability as opposed to consumption? Does it really make sense to go on consuming blindly because we can afford to consume? So same people who have purchasing power go on buying more and more. And those who need are starved. What kind of a world is that? Why do we have very few people who are constantly buying things? You know, during Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays, if Americans' shopping data shows good, increasing, the whole world gets happy. Because that means more jobs for Chinese and Indians and Koreans or whatever. Is that the kind of model we need? Then finally, I hope that as human civilization, we have matured to a point we can sort our differences across the table and not build nuclear weapons to impress each other or to threaten each other. Look at what is going on in the world today. Defense industry is almost $2 trillion a year. And it keeps on increasing. Who are we trying to kill? Why aren't we building better health infrastructure? During COVID crisis, not one global leader said, I will reduce my defense budget by 10%, 5% to make sure that my health infrastructure is improved. It doesn't make sense anymore to spend $2 trillion on defense. Can we begin to think of non-violence as the core of the new design? There is violence at home, there is violence on the street, there is violence all over the world. Can we begin to teach in school more about non-violence? So I think the new design really has to focus on 5 new parameters. It's that simple, but it's very complicated. Needs into focus. But it has to benefit large number of people. And it cannot concentrate wealth. 4, consumption is not the answer. Conservation and sustainability is the answer. And finally, slowly but surely, we got to reduce our emphasis on military hardware and start thinking about non-violence. The question is, how do you do all this? Who's going to do it? All those people who are in position of power have no interest to change, have no interest in changing, because they are milking the system. Why should they change? They are enjoying the power. They are in control. So the push will have to come from bottom up. It will have to come from young generation, like the demonstrations you saw during COP26. Those who have need to change have no voice. And those who are in position to implement change have no interest in change. So you have a Mexican standoff in a sense. So we need to begin new conversation. We need to sensitize people. We need to educate them. Not that I have all the answers, but all I can do is begin new conversation. We need to look at our global institutions and redesign them. We need to see if UN is the right kind of institution for 2022 and forward. Same with World Bank, same with IMF. Do we need a global institution on non-violence? Do we need a global institution on inclusion? Do we need new international patent system? Do we need institution on sustainability globally? Do we need a master plan on how to provide basic human needs? So we need to restructure our institutions, create new global institutions. Perhaps we need a global constitution that we all agree to, at least a common minimum program, respect for life, equality, inclusion, justice, democracy. There are things we can agree on, there are things we can't agree on. So that's okay. But let's begin the journey on creating global constitution. But it can only happen if the leaders of the world come together and realize that this is time to think beyond borders. This is no time to say what is good for me and my country and my border. This is time to say what is good for humanity, what is good for the world, what is good for our environment, what is good for our planet, and at the end, what is good for all people of the world. It is a tall order. It's not very simple. So the book is about beginning a new conversation. It doesn't have all the answers because we don't know all the answers. But today we are on a wrong path. We are on a path of destruction. We are on a path of confrontation. And there are 2 designs in the world today. American design, based on the design of the world they created 75, 80 years ago. So when Biden says America is back again, what we are saying is we have to take our design forward. Then you have Chinese design, which says Belt and Road Initiative, authoritarian mindset, total control of the party, which will decide what to do. What we really need is a third design. The design that is based on not command and control, that both designs have, but design that is based on collaboration, cooperation, co-creation, and not confrontation. We need a design where networking of nations is the core idea and not superpower leading the world. We need a design where we can all sit across a round table and begin to solve global challenges. We need a design where there is a global leadership, but leadership that is in the interest of the planet and people. I think it is possible. I may not be around to see the results. I'm 80 years old, but I know that there are a lot of young people who would live to be 120, 150, and their world is at stake. Their future is at stake. I always say that my grandparents gave me a world which was poor, simple, and clean. I am living for my grandchildren a world that is polluted, complex, and richer. What do we want to do now with the world? We are at a crossroad. And unless and until we focus on redesigning the world, the consequences are going to be very complex. I hope I've given you an overview. I'm sorry for taking a little longer than I thought I will take. I promise I'll take 30 minutes, but I think I've taken about 40. So my apology. And I hope we can open up for a broader conversation now. Thank you.
No need to apologize, Dr. Pitroda. That was a fabulous summary of where we stand, although it was very sobering at the same time. As you rightly said, you are 80, I'm 50, so probably the people who need to be worried about are the younger generation, and hopefully they're listening to you and they will come on board to join you on this journey to redesign the world. So once again, thank you very much. And we will open up for questions. We'll go from there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Chala, do you want to bring up the first question? You are on mute, Chala.
Okay, so quick question, Dr. Pitroda, since you mentioned China, and but would you say that 5 changes that you had proposed in redesigning the world, China is probably approaching 3 of them right now? They're addressing human needs, wealth distribution, and consumption, and at least the recent initiatives they seem to have taken by curbing capitalism there and bringing companies under, reining them in.
I firmly believe that this is something where you can't do one thing at a time. You got to do all 5 things because they go hand in hand.
Okay.
Okay. It is not something where you say, okay, I will do one, but I'll still continue to build, military power, and I'll still continue to be authoritarian, and I will not respect, human rights. You can't do that. In a hyper-connected world, you got to do all 5 at the same time. And people will find out, time will tell us. Okay. And that's the lesson to learn. Okay. So 3 out of 5 is not good enough. It's good, but it's not good enough. It will backfire. Yeah. You got to do all 5 at the same time. You got to empower your people. Okay. You can't hold a gun against them and say, now you do what I want you to do. It doesn't work in a hyper-connected world. Because the cat is out of the bag. Okay.
Thank you.
We have another question here. It's one of the things you mentioned was post Second World War, we saw a rapid decolonization of the world. What do you think that led to that?
First of all, I am not really qualified to answer every question. I'm not a historian. I'm not a political scientist. I'm not an economist. But I'll give you my view as an average citizen of the world. I think one, American democracy had to be propagated. So America supported democratic system all over the world. 2, British Raj had realized that it is not easy to rule India. And India was the key If India had not become independent, you wouldn't have this triggering effect, believe me, because India was the jewel in the crown. So Gandhi-led movement, to me, was the core of decolonizing the world. That decolonization wouldn't have started from small little country in Africa. Wouldn't have worked. It was this big part of the humanity in South Asia that became free. And it was like big hose opened up. So I think Gandhiji's ideas really changed the world. I wish when the design was being conceived in 40s, thinkers would have paid more attention to Gandhian thought. But then Gandhi was seen as the champion of decolonization. He was not seen as a philosopher. If we had followed Gandhian ideas then of non-violence, of simplicity, love, inclusion, world would be very different today. And that's why I believe Gandhi is more relevant today than ever before in the history of mankind. But Gandhi in right frame. People use Gandhi for their personal agenda. That's not the Gandhi I'm talking about. I'm talking about a Gandhi that promotes truth. You can't say, I'm Gandhian and then lie and promote lies. Okay. Today, the world is fake. Okay. A lot of these people are hypocrites. They say one thing and they do something exactly opposite. They don't mean what they say and they don't say what they mean. How could you be Gandhian and divide people? So I think the world is pretty complex. Yeah.
Actually, that brings us to this next question from our speaker, Dr. Pitroda.
Yes.
She asks, because Gandhi, had the elites with him and he was able to bring them onto his side and get them to campaign with him. Is it possible to build a consensus of the elites, this new model, because they are the ones who stand to lose the most? And without the elites, can it succeed?
I think you have to succeed, period, with the elite or without the elite. You have to succeed because the alternatives are pretty bad. If you don't succeed, world doesn't succeed. People do not succeed. There are a lot of elites who would support this, but then elite doesn't mean rich. Elite also means professors, academicians, scientists. Super rich. That will join. They may by the money power. That's a separate issue. But you got to begin that conversation. I'm not willing to say this won't work. That's not on my agenda. My agenda is how to make it work. Don't tell me it can't be done. I'm not interested in listening to that. Of course, I understand the challenges. Of course, I understand it's not simple. Okay. But how do we begin to solve the problem? It's easy to say, I remember when I came to work on telecom, at that time in India, we had 2 million telephones. It used to take 10 years to get a telephone connection. And everybody said, this is a wrong thing to do. Went to work on agriculture, water. And I said, look, I don't know anything about agriculture or water. Why should I work on it? I have no idea. I know telecom, so let me fix telecom. And everybody said it cannot be done in Indian bureaucracy. If I'd listened to them, I wouldn't have started it. Ignorance is a great asset. Today, in a short span of 30 years, we have 1.2 billion phones. We generate $150 to $200 billion worth of software service export. Can you imagine that in 1980? No way. So you got to believe in something and you got to get it done against all the odds. That's the challenge today. See, it doesn't require much talent to identify a problem. People in India think identifying problem is a great contribution. Okay. You go stand out on the street in India for about 30 minutes and you'll know all the problems. You don't need genius to identify problem. You know, every time I have a talk, people will say, oh, but what about rural area? This is not done. We all know that, right? The question is, what are you going to do about it? And then who is going to do it? Problems are known. At times, solutions are also known. Who is going to sort them out? You know?
That brings familiar with technology, right? Democracy and capitalism has spawned this growth of technology. But like any other dual use technology, what we have seen in the last 10 years especially is rise of mega corporations like Google, Facebook, and misuse of citizen data, right? Are we looking at technology more as a bane or a boon? How do we?
No, I think technology, like everything else, is a double-edged sword. Knife can to kill somebody, and knife can also be used to cut tomato and fruits. So there are always two sides. We have allowed these companies to become monopolies. How did they become monopoly? Why didn't we check that before? Why are we checking it now? Okay, we were smart enough to say, hey, these companies are becoming too big. Okay, they will misuse their power. So the idea is to really focus on small is beautiful. Focus on decentralization, networking, and don't allow. Why, for example, Facebook as an example, or any other company like that, why every country is using Facebook? Why can't they have a local Facebook? How did Chinese do it? Why can't India have their local Facebook? I don't get it. A country of 1 billion people have to rely on some company in America to connect their people. Why can't you have your own Twitter? Why can't you have your own, communication tools? But we don't do that. We don't even have our own search engine. A country of 1.2 billion people don't even have our own operating system. And we are IT superpower. Think about it. Okay. Why? Because we haven't thought through these things properly. We blindly follow. And we don't take difficult path. Less traveled path is always difficult. And I know it so well because in C. days, I know what it meant. People don't understand how we built all that. It's history now. No one even remembers. In Rajiv Gandhi's time, we started our focus on immunization. People have forgotten how polio got eradicated from India. Polio got eradicated because we had a mission on immunization. We decided to produce vaccine in India for the first time when India did not produce any vaccine. Today, we are the largest producer of vaccine. Today, we are the largest producer of milk. How did all that happen? And then people say, oh, nothing got done in 50 years. They're crazy. They're liars. Okay. But that's the world we live in. We respect them.
So a quick question, because what I understand, and a lot of questions coming from the listeners are also in the same area. So what you're proposing is we need a new economic model. I mean, of course, administration and power control, and that is one new model, and also survival and livelihood and work and measures of growth and prosperity and so on. So people want rewards for their work. Obviously, socialism went against that and said everybody is equal, everybody gets paid sustenance, that failed. Capitalism said we will reward people. That seems to be getting out of hand. So what is the new economic model?
First of all, world does not run just on economic model. Businesses run on economic model. Families don't run on economic model. When you have 3 children, you treat them equally. So it is wrong to assume that the world runs only on economic model. So you cannot take, as I said earlier, one thing out of context and say, let's just change the economy. You got to change mindset, where inclusion is important. You got to treat people with respect, dignity. Okay. You can't say that I will change my economy, but I'll continue to treat people like dirt. No way. Okay. You can't say I will continue to focus on consumption because it is good for economy, and I will not worry about sustainability. Out of context. You've got to say, am I going to world? Am I going to respect? Am I going to respect? That's the beginning. Then comes human needs. Then comes sustainability and non-violence. So you got to look at all of democracy, socialism. So don't judge people based on this label or that label. Labels. And that is the challenge. I think all of it is possible today because of the tools we have in hyperconnectivity. You got to think very different. Today we use hyperconnectivity to do the things that we have been doing in the past. We haven't used hyperconnectivity to do things we have never done before. We don't know what that is. Okay. So why does it take $100,000 to get an MBA? Why can't we get an MBA for $1,000? That's the question to ask. What should be education about? Education should be about making me a self-learner and not about giving me a degree. Can you make me a self-learner by the time I'm 16? Can we change the system? Who decided it should take 4 years to get a degree? Can I change that? So I want to question everything. And that is the way to start. Not that I have answers. Please don't get me wrong. Not that I have all the wisdom. I'm not saying that. But collectively, we will find answers. We have all the wisdom collectively. If we first agree on broader principles. If you want to distinguish people based on race, religion, gender, it is a non-starter. Okay. Those are the issues in front of us.
So you mentioned that today we are in a 2-block system, right? Almost akin to the Cold War era, where you had US on one side and Russian-led system. Today we are replaced Russia with China. In the past, we had non-aligned movement to kind of counterbalance the 2-block system. So do you think we need something similar to that, which is probably led by non-state actors and probably youth forums across the world?
See, again, I don't want to go to the old labels of non-aligned and aligned and all that. I want to go to the new labels of networking, collaboration, cooperation, co-creation, because that is the world we live in. You know, for example, let's take human rights. Okay. Do we know the human rights of a digital citizen? We don't. What is digital nationality? I could be living in US, working in Europe, and buying things from Brazil and paying it in Chinese currency and doing work in India. What does it mean? We haven't through all these things. We still go back to old labels, non-aligned. I don't care about non-aligned anymore. That's over. I care about networking. I care about co-creation. Okay, non-aligned movement, people still thought that production is local. Now, where do you create? What do you create? Where do you work? Has a different meaning. How do you work is a different meaning. What is work is different. Okay. Work is no longer about taking hammer and bending something. Okay. Work is no longer 9 to 5. Work is 24 hours. Okay. The definition of work has changed. The definition of job has changed. Job is not about 40 hours a week. Okay. Job is not about permanent position and pay and pension and retirement benefit. No. Job is about an assignment. 6 months, 6 years, 2 years, 2 weeks, 4 weeks. And it is multidisciplinary. It is no longer about just electrical engineering. Okay, it is also about psychology, philosophy, sociology and everything else, because we got to work very differently now. Everything has to change. The core has to be hyperconnectivity. So I want hyperconnectivity to be the core of our new thinking. And what does hyperconnectivity say? Democratization, decentralization, demonetization, co-creation, collaboration, cooperation, networking, equality, flat organizations, okay, breaking hierarchies. All of these are new ideas. You cannot have this design. Have a minister of textile in this day and age. You cannot have a minister of shipping. What type of system is that? You have all these vertical silos created 80 years ago, and you still have ministry of all that. Okay. What does Ministry of Education mean anymore? Ministry of Health is today Ministry of Sickness. It is not Ministry of Wellness. So I'm beginning to question very fundamentals in our approach to problem solving.
So that's a very valid point you have, and I think we do agree. But the fundamental issue is that if we have to attack all the 5 points that you mentioned simultaneously, and 2 of them are of real concern, military, for example, unless all the nations get together, I don't think you can start on military. And if you don't start on military, unless you, and as you say, unless you do all 5, you don't start at all, this might never get off. Second is authority. There has to be some form of authority to bring law, order, discipline, control.
Sure, that's what government is.
Yes, so government also need to redefine, and we need to have a new form of.
Of course, we need a new form of government. Of course, we need new organizational architecture in the government. Of course, we need new democracy. I agree. That's what I'm talking about. Okay. Democracy is not about voting once a year or once every 5 years.
What that form is right now.
But can we begin a new conversation on it? Don't start with the fact that we don't have all the answers. Accept the fact that we don't have all the answers. Okay? And begin the journey. But be very clear in mind, this is our end goal. End goal is we got to do all these 5 things. We got to recognize the power of hyperconnectivity. We got to worry about the planet and the people. And then everything else will begin from there. And all problems are not going to be sorted out at the same time. It's a process. It may take 20 years, 10 years. But can we start on that journey now? Can we accept first that we need to redesign the world? Can we accept that it has to be from bottom up?
So,
Can we expect? Yeah, go ahead, please.
Sure. So, what role would say religion, culture, tradition have? Because we are different people across the world, different cultures, different.
Good. That's good. Diversity has to be celebrated. It is okay for you to have different religion, but don't impose your religion on me. That's your personal thing. Okay, keep it personal. My wife is very religious. I'm not, but that's okay. All right. We all have to be different, and we have to respect each other's diversity. But there is something personal and there is something public. I'm not going to change my look. There is no way I can change my look. It's given to me. I'm brown, it is given to me. So accept that. Perfect. Okay. I'm man. That's not, I can't change that. So I think recognize that this is personal space. This is family space. This is community space. This is public space. But at the same time, I have a global space. I have a moral space. Okay. And think very differently. Don't think like an Indian. Don't think like a Hindu. Don't think like a man. Okay. That is the issue.
So we have a couple of questions on this broad theme, which is probably Sanjay Jasrani and others on the listening channel are asking. Now, the youth of the world, Greta Thunberg and many other young and energetic people, they have the right mindset. How can philanthropists and self-help groups and people who have, people like you, right? How can we all come together to give them the boost? Because at the end of the day, they have maximum to lose and the stakes are high really for them.
I agree.
All
I can do is ask them to read the book. Start a conversation. What they have in terms of energy, reach, and all that, I don't have. Okay. I have my limitations. I'm 80 years old. Okay. Whatever I can do, I'll be happy to do it for them, with them. You know, there is no issue at all. But I have my limitations. I recognize that. Okay. All I did is wrote this book. Okay. Now, these young people have to start discussion on the book, debate on the book, agree, disagree, whatever they want to do. I'm available. Okay. But I recognize my limitations. Plus, I don't have all the answers. I'm not an expert on anything. Okay. I might wind up saying something wrong. Don't take it personally. That's not my goal. Okay. I will apologize in the beginning, saying, look, I'm not trying to hurt anybody, trying to say against anybody. I'm not against China. I'm not against US. I'm not against anything. I'm for all of these things. So you need a different mindset. Get me connected to young people. I'll be happy to talk to them. Have me, Manthan is an opportunity for me to express my views. And I need 1,000 Manthans in the world. Okay. And I'm willing to devote all my time all day. You said 6:30 in the morning. I said, fine. You said 12 o'clock at night. I would say, fine. That's what I can do.
You run a lot of elite. This is a man, and she wants to know that this philanthropic work, which is elite-led philanthropy, does it cater to the current design, and how do you redesign the foundation work to follow your philosophy that you're proposing now?
Let me tell you that I run 5 foundations. One is in Bangalore. I started 30 years ago with a friend of mine, Darshan Shankar, to document all the herbal medicinal plants in India. No one had any documentation. There are 7,000 plants which are unique to Indian climate. When I started this foundation, nobody would give a dime. I got first funding from Danish government. Today, it is a full-fledged university called Transdisciplinary University, where I'm a chancellor. Darshan is a vice chancellor. We have 300 people. We have our own hospital. And we have documented all of India's herbal medicinal plants with genetic pool, chemical synthesis, but it took 30 years to do that. Nobody knows. Nobody cares. Ratan Tata gave us 50 crore after 25 years or 20 years. Okay. It's an independent foundation, runs by itself. Another thing I do is I have 10 food banks that I started 10 years ago in India to feed hungry. I have on board all the richest people in the world. Nobody has given a dime, not a dime. Okay. It runs somehow. Then I have a foundation in Washington, DC called Global Knowledge Initiative. You can look at all those on the website. And Global Knowledge Initiative, I started 10 years ago to help Africa with American knowledge. Been there for 10 years. We do well. We have about, 12 people. We are all over in Africa talking about innovations and training people and teaching. Now, financially, it is independent. We get money from Rockefeller Foundation and others to run it. I have a foundation where we take social entrepreneurs and meet once a year in India and connect them with Silicon Valley. This is called India Action for India. So I do a lot of these things, but it's a very low key. I'm not that rich to be able to donate money. I'm not in the business of donating money. I don't have it. I have ideas. Okay. One of the mistakes I made in life is probably didn't become billionaire. Okay. It didn't interest me then. And then it was too late. Then I have 5-6 startups, mainly high tech. I do it only because of intellectual curiosity. It's not a matter of making money or building a business and taking IPO and all that. It doesn't interest me anymore. So that's what I do. So going back to your question, when people, philanthropists who want to donate money, they are in the business of giving money. It's very different because they dictate what you can do and what you can't do. They don't give money to people and say, you do whatever you want to do, which meets local requirements. They don't do that. They would say, I'll give you money, but you do what I want you to do. Very different model, which is okay.
Yeah, Shravan, you have something?
Yeah, I know we have last few questions here. So I guess one of the fundamental concept that we are dealing with here is like in the new design, is there a role for a state, or do we need to relook at the world which is stateless, or what happens to the traditional boundaries?
I think there is a role for state, but the role for state is very different from the role state is playing today. Take, for example, let's take India as an example, not necessarily, the best case, but let's take India and say, I would rather see 750 different governments, each district responsible for their tax collection, education, health, agriculture, food, because every state has their own soil, own microbes, which are very different. The tomato that grows in Andhra is very different from the tomato that grows in Gujarat. Okay. Every state has their own unique requirement. Somebody may have flood problem, somebody may have heat problem, somebody may have jungle, whatever. So let's break this into 750 different or whatever the district numbers are. Okay. And let them collect taxes. Some of that tax will go to the state. Some of the state tax will go to the federal. Today, it is exactly opposite. Okay. And each district will encourage local production, local talent, local wisdom. I need hospital at my level. I don't care about a hospital in Delhi. You build a 5-star hospital in Delhi is of no interest to me. Can I get something in my state? Can I have a good university in my district? Sorry, not state, district. So you got to turn model upside down. Of course, state will have a role to play. It will coordinate a bunch of districts. And federal will coordinate a bunch of states. There will be certain hierarchy. But the state and federal will not have Ministry of Textile. Okay. There will not be a Ministry of Shipping. Center would be responsible for security, safety, and few other larger issues, environment, which cross borders. Okay, that's it. You will change the whole architecture. Today, we do not have elected government at the district level. District is run by IAS officer. It should be run by elected officers. Mayor of a city in India has no power. Okay, how could you expect city to be successful if city is run by a professional and political parties have nothing to do with it? So everything needs to be changed.
Yep. Anything else, Shravan?
I think there was another question I saw on the.
Yeah, I think broadly, most of the questions are centered around how do we deal with the current, I guess, the current systems and institutions in place, whether it is UN or the system of carbon credits and all. Does it have a role
all
to
that?
play?
That's all wrong. It's all vested interest. I agree. You got to question every system. Okay.
So we need to hit a reset button.
Yeah. I mean, what is the role of UN? Okay. Look at all these conferences going on right now. Okay. COP26. What have they accomplished? And you know what happens is the leader goes to that conference. When he comes home, everybody's praising what a great job he did. It's all bogus. Okay. He didn't do a good job. He did a miserable job. But people say, oh, my leader was the great, blah, blah, blah. Everybody's clapping because media is captured. Okay. Nobody said, hey, my leader did not go and say what is good for humanity, what is good for planet. My leader did not say that environment is not a national issue, it's a global issue. I'm not here to talk about what my country can do. I'm here to talk about what we all can do together. Okay. I'm not here to sell what is good for my country. I'm here to sell what is good for humanity and planet. Nobody said that. Okay. But everybody's praised. So we have created a totally fake world. But that's what sells.
The youth in this fake world, they seem to be chasing money these days and consumption. So
that's the model we reward. See, people look to World Economic Forum as the answer to the world's poverty. Oh, come on, give me a break. Okay. They're not going to worry about poverty. They'll talk, they'll give lip service. They are there to make money. Okay. Everybody is there to make money. And everybody is chasing wealth. Who is going to solve the larger problems? And what will you do with all this wealth if you had it? If you can't breathe clean air in Delhi, what does it mean to be very rich in Delhi? Okay. It's that simple. Okay. You build a fancy house and outside your house is garbage, all kinds of conflict going on. What good is that? There is no security. So you got to think about what you value. At the end of the day, values matter. What do you really value in life? Do you value money? Fine. Do you value only your power? Okay. Hire 10 people and order them all day. It all depends. And that's where Gandhiji comes in. I believe in Gandhian values. I have lived with that to some extent. And I think simplicity is important in life. Truth has to be fundamental. Love has to be a core of my life. Trust, I trust you. Okay. If Shravan says something, I'm not going to ask him, show me your certificate. If he says, I'm a software engineer, I trust him. He's a software engineer. Okay. We don't trust people because people don't believe in trust. And so anything we do requires a big contract and lawyers and accountants. And, if Shravan says, I'll give you $100, I believe he'll give $100 to somebody. I don't need a written document on it. I think that's the world we have lost, the world of values.
Thank you, Shravan.
Yeah, I think on that note, we'll conclude today's session. Thank you, Dr. Pitroda. It was a fascinating session. You gave us a lot to think about. I think we'll read your book. I will definitely read your book, and I'll encourage my 3 boys to read the book, because at the end of the day, it's their future at stake, right? And
Thank you very much.
let's hope there is a way to rally the youth of this world to come on a common platform and fight for this. And with that note, thank you and have a good day. And
thank you,
again,
and
thank you
really
for
appreciate
making
the opportunity, and look forward to being in touch with both of you.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Doctor. Especially, I would like to thank you for accommodating us and rescheduling this from September 21st to today.
No problem.
Yeah, that was very nice of you.
I know. Thank you.
Thank
But
you.
be in touch. Okay, please.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.